More than 4 hours had passed since it became known that Natalie was not on board. At 1:30 a.m., the captain reported the incident to the Coast Guard. He emphasized that he noticed her disappearance immediately, but for some reason did not report it to the Coast Guard in time. Why was there a pause? Who was actually making decisions during those hours? The actress's body was found in the morning in Istan Bay, about a mile from where the yacht was moored. The boat, which, according to Wagner, she allegedly sailed away on, was soon found nearby. Tied to a rock, the engine was not started. Multiple bruises and abrasions were found on the actress's body, especially on her arms and legs, as well as a fresh wound on her left cheek. All of this could be explained by a fall and a collision with the boat's hull, but it could also indicate a struggle. The initial conclusion of the investigation: an accident. Dear viewers, in the next video releases, you will find very intriguing and confusing cases, and in order not to miss them, be sure to subscribe to the channel and please like the video. Every generation produces stars who do more than just act in films. They embody an entire era. For America in the 1950s to 1970s, Natalie Wood was such a figure. Her path from a modest girl from a Californian town to a Hollywood icon was built as if according to the script of a classic American drama. She was a symbol of innocence, beauty, and tragedy. And in her fate, as in the best films with her participation, there was always a sense of tension, as if somewhere behind the scenes there was a final twist that could change everything. Born on July 20th, 1938 in San Francisco, under the name Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko, she was the daughter of Russian immigrants. Her mother, Maria, dreamed of Hollywood fame not for herself, but for her daughter. From childhood, Natalie was surrounded by cameras, auditions, and endless expectations. At the age of 5, she made her film debut, and at 8, she received her first notable role in a film. The public immediately sensed a special magic in this girl, not just talent, but a maturity that is not typical of children. There was something more to her than just acting skills. Film critics noted her expressive eyes, her ability to convey complex emotions, and her almost intuitive understanding of the camera, as if she was born not for the screen, but from it. By her teenage years, Natalie Wood was no longer just an actress. She was a real phenomenon. Her transition from child roles to adult roles was a rare example of organicity in Hollywood, where many young stars were lost, unable to withstand the pressure of the industry. But Natalie continued to grow, as an actress and as a person. Natalie's youth was spent under the spotlight and surrounded by studio systems that spared no one, especially young actresses. In an era when studios determined what a star would eat, who she would date, and even how she would behave, Natalie grew up under control and strict discipline. From an early age, she knew that tears behind the scenes do not matter if you smile on screen. She starred in several films a year, worked with the most important directors of the time, and gradually moved from the status of a child star to a mature artist. But behind the screen magic, there was another Natalie, vulnerable, anxious, suffering from chronic self-doubt. Since her youth, she struggled with internal fears, the most important of which was water. Her mother, according to Natalie herself, once turned to a fortune teller, and she allegedly predicted that the girl would die, drowning in dark water. This image haunted the actress all her life, and the fear of water became almost obsessive. Despite this, she often found herself on yachts and boats, especially in the company of her husband, actor Robert Wagner. Their relationship with Wagner was both fabulous and tense. They first married in 1957, when Natalie was just 19. Young, popular, successful, she looked at Wagner, an actor slightly older, as a romantic hero. However, their first marriage lasted only until 1962. According to one version, the reason was tension and jealousy. Both were famous, both faced with the temptations and expectations of Hollywood. After the divorce, Natalie experienced several stormy romances, and then got close to Wagner again. In 1972, they remarried. Supporters of this love said, "If people are made for each other, they will come together anyway." But behind the facade of a second chance, there were old cracks. In the 1970s and early 1980s, Natalie continued to act, although her activity decreased. She focused on her family, on raising her daughter. Her screen image no longer met the demands of the new Hollywood, but she was respected, as a professional, as a legend. She was preparing for a comeback, new projects, a new chapter in her career. Natalie was always drawn to people of art. She was friendly, charming, but at the same time, very sensitive. She knew how to recognize hypocrisy and did not tolerate pressure. Her personal diaries, according to the recollections of her relatives, were filled with thoughts about fear, love, and loneliness. Despite her fame, Natalie often felt vulnerable. In interviews, she repeatedly mentioned her difficult childhood, psychological pressure, and difficult relationship with her mother, who tried her best to make a star out of her, sometimes to the detriment of Natalie herself. Fear of water, a constant sense of threat, a prophecy from childhood, a complicated relationship with her husband. All of this seemed to fit into a dark mosaic that no one wanted to notice. On screen, Natalie always remained strong, determined, bright. But in life, she remained the same girl from San Francisco who just wanted to be loved and understood. Friday, November 27th, 1981. The Thanksgiving holiday weekend is in full swing. Southern California welcomes visitors with warm, windless weather, and the yacht Splendor sets out from Marina del Rey for Santa Catalina Island. Catalina Island has always seemed like the perfect place for a short escape from the bustle of Los Angeles. Calm waters, secluded coves, starry skies above yachts bobbing in the darkness. It was here in late November 1981 that the yacht Splendor arrived, carrying actress Natalie Wood, her husband Robert Wagner, actor Christopher Walken, and the ship's captain, Dennis Davern. It was technically a relaxing weekend among friends, a brief respite from the film sets. But what happened on board that night later gave rise to a wave of rumors, versions, and speculations, as if something cracked in this seeming idyll during the evening wine and conversations. According to official information, on Saturday, November 28th, the group spent the day on the island. They had lunch, walked around Avalon, drank, laughed. Natalie looked relaxed, although, according to eyewitnesses, she was a little quieter than usual. Captain Davern will later recall that the tension between Robert Wagner and Christopher Walken began to be felt even then. Perhaps it was jealousy. Natalie and Walken spent a lot of time together on the set of the film Brainstorm, and their closeness was discussed in the acting community. But whether it was friendship, flirtation, or just professional solidarity, no one will say for sure. Returning to the yacht in the late afternoon, the company continued to drink wine, dine, discuss films, and later entered a phase that Captain Davern would call murky in his memoirs. The lights are dim, the atmosphere is volatile, the voices are getting louder. Walken and Wagner argue about their careers, about the role of women in the acting profession. Natalie tries to smooth things over, but the argument escalates into a quarrel. Robert Wagner is irritated. He drinks more and more. Natalie goes to the cabin. And then the versions diverge. Officially, according to the initial report, Natalie disappeared on the night of November 28th to 29th. Somewhere around 11 p.m., the captain noticed that Natalie was not on board. Her bedroom was empty. The inflatable boat that was tied to the side of the vessel was gone. Wagner, according to Davern, seemed irritated, but not alarmed. According to him, Natalie may have decided to swim to the shore. She allegedly did this before, when she quarreled with him. However, most who knew Natalie personally claimed that she was afraid of water, did not know how to steer a boat, and would never have gone alone into the darkness of the night, especially in a state of alcoholic intoxication. Around the same time, as it would later turn out, several people in the coastal houses on the island heard strange sounds. A woman's voice, anxious, intermittent. Not a scream, but not a conversation either. As if someone was calling, either for help or just into the void. These sounds soon died down, and no one attached any importance to them. Only later, when everything had already become known, did the neighbors begin to remember that night as something ominous. By a strange coincidence, the rescue operation did not begin immediately. The actress was not officially reported missing until the first hours of the morning. More than 4 hours had passed since it became known that Natalie was not on board. At 1:30 a.m., the captain reported the incident to the Coast Guard. But by then the darkness and rising tide could have carried any clues away from the yacht. Captain Dennis Davern looked tense. He emphasized that he noticed the disappearance immediately, but for some reason did not report it to the Coast Guard in time. This discrepancy raised many questions for the investigators. Why was there a pause? Who was actually making the decisions during those hours? And most importantly, was it just a mistake or a deliberate delay? On the yacht's deck, the investigators noticed a strange picture. Personal belongings remained in their places. The cabins were neatly tidy, but the atmosphere itself seemed disturbing. There was a feeling that something had happened, but the participants in the evening spoke little and very carefully. The testimonies did not always match, especially in details. Someone claimed that he went to bed immediately after returning from the restaurant. Another recalled raised voices coming from the cabin. Everything seemed ordinary, but there was something unnatural in this ordinariness. While the experts studied the boat, which was in perfect order on the water, and the navigation devices, the investigators increasingly encountered not facts, but silence. It was as if on board the yacht, among the familiar things, the cozy cabins and the half-empty glasses, someone was trying hard to erase the line between chance and something more complex. And the more time passed, the more obvious it became. This evening was not at all what they wanted to present it as. Natalie Wood's body was found on November 29th at 7:44 a.m. in Istan Bay, about a mile from where Splendor was moored. She was wearing a nightgown, a warm fleece jacket, and wool socks. The boat, which according to Wagner she allegedly sailed away on, was found shortly thereafter. Tied to a rock, the engine was not started. Multiple bruises and abrasions were found on the actress's body, especially on her arms and legs, as well as a fresh wound on her left cheek. All this could be explained by a fall and a collision with the hull of the boat, but it could also indicate a struggle. The initial conclusion of the investigation: an accident. Natalie allegedly tried to untie the boat, slipped, hit her head, fell into the water, and drowned. However, this scenario raised more and more questions. Why did she decide to leave the yacht late at night? Why did no one hear a splash or cries for help, although the waters in that bay were calm? Why did no one start searching immediately, despite the obvious absence? Captain Davern broke his silence several years later. He said that night he heard a loud argument between Natalie and Robert Wagner. Wagner allegedly became very annoyed about her communication with Wagner, and later, in a fit of anger, smashed a bottle of wine on the table. After this, according to the captain, Natalie and Wagner went on deck, and he remained below. Sometime later, Wagner returned alone. Natalie was never seen again. Davern claimed that Wagner forbade him to call the Coast Guard immediately. Moreover, he insisted that the incident not be reported until the morning. If these words are to be believed, the tragedy could have been discovered earlier, and perhaps there would have been a chance to save Natalie. But then, in 1981, these details did not become the subject of a criminal investigation. Hollywood was silent, the public mourned, and Robert Wagner, with tears in his eyes, said touching words at his wife's funeral. While the world mourned the loss of their beloved actress, not everyone believed in the version of an accident. Especially worried were Natalie's fans and friends, who knew her fear of water. Actress Lana Wood, Natalie's sister, claimed from the very beginning that her sister could not have gone out on deck at night voluntarily. She insisted on a reinvestigation, calling the death a veiled truth. However, for decades the case remained closed. Despite the hints, suspicions, and growing number of questions, neither Robert Wagner, Christopher Walken, nor Captain Davern were ever formally charged. That changed 30 years later. In 2011, after the release of Goodbye Natalie, Goodbye Splendor, and Davern's revelations on national television, the LAPD reopened the case. Shortly thereafter, the official cause of death was changed from accident to drowning and other undetermined factors. It didn't sound like an indictment, but it made it clear that the police were no longer confident in the innocence of everyone involved that night. But when the investigation into Natalie Wood's death began, it was from the very beginning accompanied by contradictions, omissions, and an uneasy silence that seemed to envelop everything that happened on the yacht Splendor that night. In 1981, Despite Natalie's fame, the investigation moved quickly. In the opinion of many observers, too quickly. Just a few days after her death, the case was formally closed, and the official cause of death was listed as an accident. Many details were ignored, and questions were left unanswered. But as it turned out later, the truth did not disappear. It was simply biding its time. Initially, the Los Angeles County Police accepted the version presented by Robert Wagner. Natalie went on deck to untie the boat, slipped, fell into the water, and drowned. The medical examiner confirmed that she had 0.14 parts per million of alcohol in her blood, moderate intoxication. Traces of headache pills and relaxants were also found. The combination could have affected her coordination. This scenario seemed logical, but only at first glance. The yacht captain, Dennis Davern, who confirmed Wagner's version in 1981, admitted years later that he lied under pressure. He claimed that he was scared, did not know what to do, and feared the consequences. According to him, Robert Wagner forbade him to call the Coast Guard immediately, and also insisted that no one raise a panic. Davern emphasized that there was a serious conflict between Wood and Wagner that night, after which Natalie disappeared. His revelations became a turning point. In 2011, 30 years after the tragedy, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department unexpectedly announced the reopening of the investigation. The reason was Davern's testimony and new details that appeared in the documentary book, Goodbye Natalie, Goodbye Splendor. The shocked public seemed to be reliving the tragedy. Why hadn't the case been solved sooner? Why had the captain's initial testimony changed so dramatically? Investigators re-interviewed everyone on board. Robert Wagner declined a personal interview, providing a written statement. Christopher Walken, on the other hand, agreed to an interview. He claimed that he had not seen Natalie in her final moments, had not heard any splashes, screams, or falling into the water. He also insisted that there had been no physical conflict, only a verbal discussion over dinner. But even then, investigators began to openly express doubts about the veracity of some of the statements. One of the most important elements of the new investigation is the forensic examination, which was repeated in 2012. As a result, the conclusion on the cause of death was changed. Now, it was not just about drowning, but about drowning and other unspecified factors. The experts noted that there were numerous bruises and abrasions on Natalie's body, which were not typical for a simple fall. Particularly suspicious was the fresh wound on the cheek and bruises on the front of the legs and arms, which could have been caused by a physical collision or struggle. Moreover, it was noted that some of the injuries clearly occurred before the actress got into the water. Particular attention was drawn to the position of the inflatable boat that was found. It was found on the shore, allegedly thrown out by the current. However, everything was in place in the boat. A life jacket, an ignition key. The engine was not started. The boat looked as if it had simply been released or had broken away, and not as a means by which someone was trying to get to dry land. Forensic experts insisted that the injuries alone were not enough to draw any definite conclusions. But in combination with other circumstances, the night on the yacht increasingly resembled not an accident, but a fragment of a more complex and unsolved story. Documents with conclusions were sent to investigators, but the final explanation of what happened remained vague. Investigators began to piece together the story. According to one version, Natalie and Robert Wagner really did quarrel over Christopher Walken. Dinner turned into a quarrel, and the quarrel turned into a conflict. Then events unfold rapidly. Natalie goes on deck, perhaps to be alone. Wagner follows her. What happens next is a mystery. But after some time, the actress ends up overboard. Officially, no one heard a scream, but independent witnesses claim the opposite. One of the main questions that could not be clearly answered was, why was help not called immediately? Why did it take more than 4 hours before the captain contacted the Coast Guard? If help had arrived earlier, Natalie might have been saved. But that period, from 11 p.m. to 1:30 a.m., remained shrouded in silence. Davern claimed that he wanted to call immediately, but Wagner forbade it. Robert Wagner denies this. In 2018, the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department announced that Robert Wagner had been officially named a person of interest in the case, meaning someone at the center of the investigation but not charged. Investigators noted that he was the last person to see Natalie alive, and his actions that night raised many questions. However, despite this, no charges were ever filed. The prosecutor's office considered that there was not enough direct evidence to open a criminal case. The motive, possible witnesses, and most importantly, physical evidence, were either lost or unavailable after so many years. Some journalists compared the case to a Hollywood script in which important scenes were cut and actors played roles, hiding their true emotions. Davern, Walken, Wagner, each in fact stuck to their own version. Natalie, the only one who could tell the truth, was gone forever. Lana Wood, the actress's sister, did not give up hope. In interviews and books, she continued to say that her sister would not have gone into the water voluntarily. She urged Robert Wagner to tell the truth, no matter how painful it was. But Wagner, now in his old age, rarely comments on the case. His memoirs treat Natalie with caution and respect, but do not reveal the details of that night. The investigation, despite the official status of an open case, has effectively stalled. Without new evidence, without new witnesses, it has become a symbol of how easily the truth can disappear, even when all the world's attention is focused on one yacht, one night, and one tragedy. Questions remain. Why did they not call for help immediately? What exactly happened in the cabin and on the deck that night? Why did the investigation close so quickly in 1981? And could it have ended differently? Decades after her death, the name Natalie Wood still evokes excitement. And not because she was a star, but because her fate conceals one of the darkest secrets of Hollywood. In most criminal cases, there comes a point when the investigation leads to the courtroom, where confessions are made under oath, where truth and lies are brought into the open. After Natalie Wood's death, already in early December 1981, a short and formal medical examiner's trial was held in Los Angeles County. The coroner, based on the testimony of the crew and cruise participants, declared, "Death was caused by an accident." At the same time, the report indicated that Natalie had abrasions and bruises that could have been caused by a fall. There were no additional expert opinions, reconstructions of events, or subpoenas. A verdict of accident was reached without much debate, and the case was officially closed. However, even at that stage, some lawyers and journalists wondered, why did the medical examiner not consider certain evidence? Why weren't the independent witnesses from the shores of Santa Catalina who heard the women's screams from the yacht questioned? Why was the court so quick to accept a version that lacked key explanations? 3 decades passed. The silence lasted almost 30 years. Only in 2011, when the yacht's captain, Dennis Davern, publicly revised his initial testimony, did the case gain new momentum. But even after the investigation was reopened, the trial never began. The police and prosecutors continued to collect data, analyze the circumstances, compare versions. But the law required stronger grounds for bringing charges, and these, from a legal point of view, were never found. One of the most discussed questions was this: is it even possible to have a successful trial after decades, especially without direct evidence, witnesses, new physical evidence? Lawyers who specialize in unexplained death cases argued that such cases are possible, but extremely difficult. The memory of witnesses is erased. The evidence is lost. And in Wood's case, the suspect was not just a husband, but a respected public figure, a longtime actor with an impeccable reputation. When Robert Wagner was named a person of interest in the investigation in 2018, many hoped that this was the first step towards formal charges. However, as prosecutors have emphasized, this status is not enough. The prosecution must be able to prove not only Wagner's possible involvement, but also intent or direct guilt. In this case, despite rumors and circumstantial evidence, there was no direct evidence of a violent interaction between Wagner and Natalie Wood. All that was there were inconsistencies, failure to call for help in a timely manner, contradictory testimony from the captain, physical injuries on the actress's body, fear of water, which all her loved ones knew about, and the lack of logic in the official version of Natalie's departure at night alone on a boat. But in criminal law, doubt is not enough. It requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt. This standard was the rock on which all efforts to reopen the case in court were dashed. Natalie's family, in particular her sister Lana Wood, did not give up. For years, she spoke in the media, wrote books, and talked to lawyers. In 2021, she even published a documentary about Natalie's life and death, where she directly stated, "I believe that my sister was a victim, and that the truth is still hidden." These statements sparked a wave of new interest in the case. Questions were raised about the pressure that was allegedly put on the investigation in 1981. There was talk of studio connections, possible agreements, but all of this remained at the level of speculation. Another difficulty was that the case has no statute of limitations. We are talking about a potential murder. Theoretically, charges could be brought at any time if new evidence emerges. Paradoxically, despite the fact that the Natalie Wood case was discussed all over the world, there was no formal trial into her death. Wagner never gave official testimony under oath. His position remained unchanged. He mourns his wife, has nothing to do with her death, and does not intend to discuss rumors. From a legal point of view, the absence of a trial is the absence of a verdict. Neither acquittal nor conviction. This is a pending case, an unfinished chapter. Decades have passed, but the case is still open. People who knew Natalie Wood do not give up. Investigators, despite the lack of official charges, continue to return to the materials, rereading the protocols, comparing old testimonies, looking for new traces and long-forgotten details. Investigators are sure that even the darkest secrets one day become visible. Perhaps very soon one of them will finally cease to be a secret. For now, there remains silence. But movement is brewing in it. And in this silence, the main thing sounds louder and louder. The truth has not yet been told, but it is approaching.